everyone. I have Clint here with me. He's a licensed therapist and he's based out of Louisiana. Welcome. Is there anything you would like to add?
No, just to say thank you so much for having me on. I'm an Army veteran, so I did some combat deployments and did 9/11, Afghanistan, Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana. I'm also an ordained minister, so I work with churches and help, with those sort of things. I'm a dad. I got two boys. I've been married about 15 years and just wrote a book called Building Better Bridges. And yeah, so that's kind of what I do.
That's a lot. So today's topic is men's mental health. And I am really fascinated by this topic. I'm really interested in it because I have a husband. I might have a son one day. I'm surrounded by men. I have a dad, and I am very acutely aware that men and women do respond to things differently. For example,
Hmm.
with my mom, we can have a really open conversation, but with my dad, there's a lot of restraint with him, and it's partly how he was raised, partly this idea that you show up and do what needs to be done, but it has been at his expense sometimes,
Hmm.
at the expense of his emotional well-being. And I want to open up this conversation because there has to be an easier way. There has to be a way where men can show up and do what needs to be done and still be okay internally. So
Yeah.
how do we make that happen? And I want to start with this question. So they say men don't ask for help, or is that a myth? Or is how true does that ring? How true is that?
Yeah, I mean, I love the question. I think as a clinician, but also as a male and a friend, I would say, there's a bell curve, right, in the research. There are men who are sensitive and who are open and who are vulnerable on either a sensitive, like there are some men who are just more sensitive in nature, they're more vulnerable in nature, and then there's what I would call rough and tumble, right? You go all the way over to the right where, they really like rough stuff and hunting and, all these things. And so on both ends of those spectrums though, people can be emotionally vulnerable. They can like I like jujitsu. I love martial arts. I was in the military, and as a clinician, right, I'm very open. But I wouldn't fall all the way to the super sensitive side because I like to do some of the activities. So I tend to find myself in the middle. So one of the most important things that I think we can learn as a culture is to not put people in groups, is to get to know people on an individual basis and ask them why it is that they're the way they are. And so one of the problems I think that we have in media and social media and podcasts is we label men this one way. And I do think it's a myth based on individual people that men aren't vulnerable. Now, if you say as a culture, what's in the middle of the bell curve, I would say that research shows that yes, men haven't been allowed to be vulnerable for a very long time.
Mm,
That
yeah.
culturally, most of the men that I've seen, whether in therapy, in jujitsu, in the army, in churches, they started out vulnerable. Research shows that boys are actually a little bit more score a little higher emotionally than girls under 5.
Mm,
But very quickly, the culture around us want us to be strong, right? Air quotes, strong, which means to the culture, not feeling, because
yeah.
we don't know how to get through something hard and cry about it at the same time. And you can't protect your family and your wife and your kids. You can't protect the country. You can't work hard in outdoor jobs in the sun, grinding away every day, risking your life, and also feel all of those feelings at the same time. You would collapse and not be able to do the thing. So I think the question that we have is how do we prepare men to do those hard things and live in that culture and be a man, and also help them recover from those things as they go through it and then afterwards. So we could use a military deployment, for example.
Mhm.
There are certain things that you can't do and be mentally healthy. The question is, when you're done doing those types of jobs and those types of works, how do you reintegrate back into a marriage or a friendship? Those are the things that we're not figuring out how to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And in your opinion, is there a seamless integration or are there agencies in place to help veterans? And exactly like you said, once you go through that experience of going through war, you're not the same. You're mentally not the same. You're psychologically not the same. So once are there agencies like keeping that in mind that integration is a step, is a process, and to help veterans integrate back into like family or society?
Yeah, I think, well, there's not much out there as far as general help, right? The VA
Mhm.
tries, but it's undermanned and undersupported. There are therapy practices like myself who try to help people, but we're full and our resources are low. So no, there's not enough resources out there. One of the problems is like doing this podcast today is trying to educate the community and have just good conversation so people learn so that then they can be
Right.
passionate about, helping. And I think one of the things we really need is for people to understand that community and preventative medicine, preventative care, preventative conversations can do a load of good if a child is going to go into a tough situation or go into the military or go into a tough job, and preparing them as a parent, preparing them as a community, as a spouse, as a friend to say, hey, have you thought about the pros and the cons? Have you thought about like what kind of resiliency you have or that you need to
Mhm.
build before you go into this? And then while you're in it, what are the things that you need to do to make sure that you can maintain health so that when you come back, you don't have so much to deal with? And you come back to a community who understands it and who is there for you and who is supportive of you. All of that matters to that individual, male or female, who's going through hard things.
Mhm. Yeah. So if someone were to go into a difficult situation, right? Whether it's war or something that they have to mentally prepare for, off the top of your head, what can you name some of the things that they might do practically to stay aware? Is it just a matter of having conversation with the people around them, making sure the support system is in place? Or what is that? I just want to have an idea of like what that might look like if someone's like watching this podcast right now without any resources or whatnot, right? And they are going into a difficult situation where they have to be resilient, where they have to learn resilience. What are some of the things that you think they might keep in mind?
Well, I think what one of the things like that the Christian Bible says is that without vision, my people perish. And so it's this idea I think that's for everybody. If you don't know why you're doing something, or you don't have a vision and an
Yeah.
end goal in mind, then you're starting out from a really bad place. So even the military, if you're joining the military or you're joining the fire department or you're joining a police department or you're going to be a professor or a therapist like us, then it's
Mhm.
really important to ask ourselves, why are we really doing this? And not only ask ourselves, but confess those things, talk to someone, process those things, and have them challenge your worldview and kind of see it as a robust, holistic thing. So they can really
Yeah.
say, okay, well, you said that you're going in this to help people, but it sounds like you're going to help yourself. Or you said you want to protect our country or the world, but do you really believe in your country's values? You say that you want to be a father and have kids, but that doesn't really sound like you want to serve kids and love them and sacrifice for them. It sounds like you want to have some little trophies to walk around. Like there's all these
Mm,
variety of questions that nobody really asks before doing something. So then they
yeah.
find themselves in the middle of it, realizing I had an idea, but my belief is not the same thing as what my actions are showing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like your why is almost like a North Star, right? Like it kind of anchors you, it carries you through.
Yeah, because if you go into any kind of service work with the idea that you're the savior, that you're the hero, and you're not just as desperate for help as everybody else, I've been in therapy for 25 years now myself. Like doing my own therapy work since I was 20 and got out of
Mhm.
Afghanistan, and that is the thing that's made me the best therapist that I can be is doing my own work and being so aware of my motives and my intentions, and realizing that I have so much more to learn every year and
Mhm.
that I haven't arrived at any place where I have all the answers or have all the information. But all those years of training and relationships definitely increase your skill and your ability to do it, and they humble you.
Mhm.
The humility of really thinking, okay, I'm going to empty myself and be less so I can serve people, but I also value myself enough to say I'm gonna take a break. I'm not gonna see this many clients. Well, again, if you've never done any
Mhm.
work before stepping into this, then you don't know your margins. You don't know your limits, and you will push yourself too hard. And I learned that lesson the hard way. I got trained in trauma and EMDR and all kinds of different modalities, TFCBT, and my whole caseload was just horrible things. And I
Mhm.
had a breakdown one week, just realizing I was just oversaturated with horrible news and ideas. And I realized, man, I needed to balance out my caseload and realize,
Mm.
everybody at every hour didn't need to be the heaviest client on earth.
All
But I
right.
felt like I needed to do it because I was one of the only people in the culture that could do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so,
So,
that
oh,
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna ask that I know you spoke about this experience in terms of being a therapist, right? Being surrounded by quote unquote like darkness. Yeah, there's a lot of darkness out there, and some of us, willingly go into it. But even society, right? We most of the time we are like surrounded by darkness, like what's out there in the news, what's constantly talked about, just the atmospheres, like what's in the collective since the pandemic, I would say, has been a little dark. And so
Hmm.
how would a person navigate that um
Yeah, I
emotionally?
mean, I think a couple of things. We're in a generation of too much information,
Mhm.
and how we handle our intake of that information is very, very important. Which means we have to have self
Mm,
control.
mhm,
We cannot be getting our dopamine from the same place we're getting our news. And so we're on there looking at reels, we're on there looking at things to buy, we're on there looking at new things to do and ways to be popular and all the things that social media and our phones do for us. And that same thing is like, hey, car crash, plane crash, politics, whatever the thing is. Lady got stuck in a driveway and died. Like, I mean, it's just constant. And I think what's happened is when we don't manage that intake, then we lose empathy in general, because we're not
mhm,
supposed to, as humans, be able to care about somebody in another state or in another country like we do our neighbor. But when we
mm,
get way more information about other people that we can't impact and that we can't love and that we can't support, and we're fixated on those things, then we don't even care about the person that's right next door to us. The person in the
mhm,
apartment across the hall, the person that lives next door, the kid's parent at our school, because we're so tired and overwhelmed by all the bad. And that's all we start to see. When in
mhm,
reality, when we can cut some of that out and filter some of that and maybe schedule it and check on it and read very particular things, then we all of a sudden wake up and stop. We're not in this place of fear all the time, and our nervous system isn't
mhm,
always dysregulated. And we look around and we go, oh, I can actually serve those. There's actually an impact on the
mhm,
world I can make, and it's right in front of me. And so I would recommend as a clinician just being very, very careful with what news sources you take in, what media you
mhm.
use, and how much you use it, because we're the first people in history to be able to know all of that instantly, and it's not doing us any good.
Yeah. 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 I hear you. I think a lot of people want to listen to the news or more than healthy because there's this idea that you have to care, right? You have to stay informed, you have to care. But I hear you when you say that almost diminishes our capacity, right? To the point where we're not able to act when we need to act on something. Let's say our neighbor needs help, right? Our neighbor's right there, that's something we can do that's within our capacity, so to speak. But then when you mentally don't have a
Power.
capacity, right, because you are drained, because you have been connecting with your phone and what's happening maybe thousands of miles away where you don't have the capability or the power to do anything. So that just leaves you feeling helpless. And so that helplessness has already set in. And when your neighbor right there says, "Hey, can you help me?" You're like, "Oh, I'm burnt out. I cannot. I'm sorry." And so I hear you. Our power lays in what's around us, right? Being able to do the little things of what's around us. And that's our part, right? Like if you just do your part. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. Do your part. Don't worry about the part that's out there. If you start worrying, that's just going to get you in a state of helplessness because that's what it is, right? Like you possibly can't do anything about things that are happening thousands of miles away, but the things that are happening right here in your neighborhood, you can do something. Whether it's going up to your neighbor and saying, "Hey, do you want to talk? You need somebody to talk to." Just for an hour, right? Or like even half hour, that might mean the world to them. Just
Yes.
for somebody to offer that emotional availability. But the problem is we don't have the emotional capacity. Most of us don't.
Nope, we don't. We fill it all day with stuff that we can't impact, and that's ultimately a mental health crisis is why we are in the state that we're in. And I think that yes, if we can all have the humility to say I cannot defeat this thing, right? Like I can't beat this phone, I can't beat this
Yeah.
laptop, I can't defeat it. I'd like to say that I can, but it is a dopamine fueled addictive mechanism that no adult prefrontal cortex can defeat. You have to put some very strict boundaries with it to where you're not going to your phone that many times a day, looking at stuff, scrolling for 30, 45 minutes, because man, it's literally killing us and is more damaging than cocaine or anything else.
Yeah, I hear you. My nervous system has not been the same since I started scrolling. That was in 2020. Before that, I was so disciplined, very focused, very disciplined. Something happened around 2020. It's like almost collectively we stopped caring. That's what it seems like, right? Like,
Yeah.
or at least for me. And yeah, I started scrolling, and I would love to say that, yeah, I have more discipline and that I don't. But this is a conversation I have with everybody, with my friends, family, clients, even my mom. Even my mom, she has started scrolling and
Mm-hmm.
she likes it. She loves it. I mean, we all do, but yeah, I think it's a matter of, yeah, knowing when to put it down. But you know what I think? I don't think there's such a thing as a little bit scrolling. I think even a little bit is dangerous, to be completely
Yeah,
honest. If it was up to me, I
there's not a
wouldn't do
little
it
bit of
at all.
heroin, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I say too.
You can't do a little bit of coke. Like, I mean, and if you look at the neurological studies, it's literally affecting our brain the same. And what's
Hmm.
even worse is that we let children do it. We
Hmm.
let 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12-year-old kids get on a device that has all of the stuff that destroys our brain and makes us terrified. And those devices are sending us stuff that we're not even looking for. And
Hmm.
it's a sad thing that we as parents, we as adults are so addicted to it that we've allowed these children to be addicted to it as well. I do have hope
Yeah.
that those that you know choose to change their life and to focus on the things that matter and redefine success, for example, I think that has a huge impact on men's mental health. We're talking about men's mental health, but we've gotten on a
Hmm.
tangent. It's
Yeah. Well,
the view of success for men is, go to high school and either play sports or get really good grades so that you can graduate and go play a sport and
hmm.
make millions of dollars and have a career until you're, somewhere around 30, 35. Hopefully you retire, then you can ride off into the sunset. Or you can go get an education, make really good grades so you can get into an undergrad that gets you nothing. And nowadays, now you have to get a master's at minimum, maybe a couple. And then if you really want to be successful, get a doctorate or be a doctor. And then you can graduate, you can get a really good job that will make you lots of money, and you'll be happy. And none of that is true. I see people every single day who make millions of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars who are top industry execs to mega church pastors to military generals, literally. And they have all the success from the world's view, and they're miserable because they don't have a relationship with their daughter, or they don't have a relationship with their son, or they've been divorced 3 times, or they're addicted to drugs and alcohol or pornography. They have an anger issue, and all of that stuff is a typical kind of male female issue, but males particularly. And those are all symptoms. And if we whittle all that back down to why are you doing all of that? It's because they're in deep pain. That
Hmm.
men are in deep pain in our country. From the ages of 35 to 45, they are 4 times more likely to kill themselves than to kill someone else. The homicide rate for that age is 4 times higher of suicide than it is homicide for men 35 to 45.
Hmm.
And so what does that mean? That means they hate themselves. They
Hmm.
have so much self-loathing and fear and pain that it would be better for them to take their own life, and better for their family and friends than it would to be to keep living. Well, what is
Hmm.
that pain? Well, that pain underneath there is they don't feel like they have worth, and they don't feel safe. And I don't mean just physically safe. I mean emotionally safe to share their feelings, to process, to be a full human. And if they do that, then they'll lose worth and value. And so it's this revolving cycle of everybody wants me to share my feelings and be this super sweet, super sensitive man, but they also want me to be able to stand up and take everybody out and fight the good fight. And balancing those two, men haven't had enough models in our country, like enough people to show them how to do that. And I think what I would
Mm-hmm.
call fathers to and men to is, man, find a guy in your life who you think is healthy, who can mentor you, find a counselor who can mentor you, and do the work of reparenting yourself. Be
Mm-hmm.
the father to yourself, or allow God to be the father to you, that can help you see that you are worthy, you are loved, you are valuable, you have unique gifts and skills that you bring to the world, and it can change. Your brain is has elasticity to it. You can learn, you can be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You can do this work, and over time you can literally become a new person. And yes, it's going to be hard, and yes, it's going to be difficult. But as you do that, then you get to be one of those people for the other men in your life and mentor boys and teenagers. And so, as bad as I think things are, I do think that we have all the resources in 2025 that we need to heal and to bring that healing to other people in our world. Because addiction gets
Mm-hmm.
passed down, trauma gets passed down, but so does healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sometimes I hear men saying, I've heard this narrative that they are open to feeling, they're open to experiencing emotions, and that doesn't scare them. What shuts them down is the response they get from either their wife or a female figure, right? Who gets
Mm-hmm.
afraid of that kind of vulnerability from the man. I've heard this directly from one of my listeners who commented. What do you think is going on? What is your response
Yeah,
to that?
it's so true. I mean, again, it's a case by case basis, but again, it goes to that whole like, you want me to be sensitive, and then when I open up and I'm vulnerable, you immediately reject that or minimize that
Mm,
or take it personally. And a man is going to shut down really quickly, right, when they feel unsafe, and they already feel unsafe and they already feel unloved. And you're saying, hey, be more vulnerable, risk, risk, risk. And then you do, and it's either not enough, it's too much, it's not in what you want. And it's not really about hearing and seeing
mm,
what that man's going through and trying to understand. And I laugh about this all the time because, there's a million blogs on what it's like to be a woman, a million blogs on what it's like to be a mother, what it's like to be a stay-at-home mom, what it's like to be a mom who works. Like, we have a lot of things, and thank God, like, women need to be heard and seen, and I think validated. And I love that they do those things. But you just think about if a man, wrote a blog about how hard it is to be a father, you know, how quickly the culture would be like, oh my gosh, sure, dude. Especially a white male.
mm,
For me, being a white male, it's like, we have privilege, we have all these things that are consequential, that are real things that we've benefited from. And sometimes that keeps anybody from being able to express, man, can we hold two
mm,
truths at the same time? There are things that have benefited me in the culture. There are things that are privileges that I get to experience, but I also had no choice in that, and it also doesn't take away my pain. It doesn't make
right.
breakups or rejection or trauma less painful. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's where ideologies of like all white men, all Asian men, all black men, all women, that is what destroys our culture and our unity. Instead of saying, hey, can
Mm-hmm.
you tell me how this has affected you?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how your dad,
Yeah.
tell me how did your dad hug you? Did your dad love you? Did your dad validate you? When you went to school, did you get bullied? What was that like for you? And if we actually genuinely want to hear that story from each other, I think men would be way more apt to open up. Here's my challenge though. We also, as men, can act like a bunch of little boys because we are, right? Our inner child is so underdeveloped and so traumatized that we then say, well, unless you're perfectly safe, I'm not going to be vulnerable. And you
Right.
need to nurture me and be safe for me, or I'm not going to open up. I've
Mm-hmm.
opened up before and I got burnt. And that's where personal responsibility is extremely important. That all of us are responsible to regulate ourselves and to do our own
Mm-hmm.
work. And we can't sit around and wait on another human being to validate us enough to validate ourselves. We have got to go, man, I have worth, I have value, and I can change. And I'm going to be in relationships that are hard, and sometimes they're going to be difficult, but I'm going to ride it out and I'm going to fight it out. And that, in my opinion, is what being a man is about. And I think being emotional, being vulnerable, but also being someone who doesn't let other people and their emotions determine how we act.
Hmm. Yeah. I wanted to comment on something you said, which is what you said in the beginning as well. See the person for who he is, or even who she is, but who he is in this conversation, and ask him questions rather than seeing him for the external, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
white or black or Asian, male or whatnot, and putting him in a category of what you think of an idea of what you think he might be. Take it human by human, like one human at a time. But I also wonder, and this is like going back to like us losing our capacity, this tendency to see in this dichotomous thinking, right? This or that. Like everybody falls in a category, and I'm going to see as category rather than as, like, human by human. I think it
Uh-huh.
just comes down to us losing our capacity, because that's a trauma response, right? Like
It is.
seeing in black and white, seeing dichotomously. One of our, as a therapist, one of our interventions is sometimes if a client is very like this or that and doesn't see nuances, the intervention is to help them see the nuances, think less dichotomously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, and that's something that has, that I've been thinking about, that has come up for me. Like, if that is a collective trauma response, we've been traumatized collectively. And as society, as a group of people, I wonder if we've lost the ability to go human by human, because that takes a lot of energy, like, takes a lot of mental energy and being present and aware in the moment. And I wonder how many people would rather just check out and go to the assumption. I wonder if it's just easier that way.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I don't think it's easier. I think doing the right thing is easier and better in the long
Right.
run. But I think it has more instant gratification and it makes us feel safer.
Yeah.
That trauma response, right, is fight or flight or freeze or fawn or using sex. Those are ways in which we keep ourselves safe and we find ourselves, telling ourselves we're okay. It's very dangerous for people who have been hurt, who have been traumatized, who have been victims of sexism or racism or bigotry or abuse. Like, those are real things that happen. And what I would challenge people is to realize that validation is very important. Telling your story is so important. And you should go and you should tell someone that story, write that story, and then you have to kind of look at that story and realize that the whole thing isn't true. Parts of it are true. Your feelings matter and your experience
Mhm.
matters, but it's not always factual. And so we've got to kind of figure out as individuals, what is factual, what is my responsibility, and what is not. And what we talk about there is the window of tolerance, right? Like, I can't deal with Black people, or I can't deal with Indian people, or I can't deal with cops, or I can't go to school, or I can't speak in public, or I can't talk to my husband again about this, or whatever the thing is. And you go, okay, well, you have a very small window of tolerance for that. Let's figure out why that is. Let's tell your story. Where were you victimized? Where were you traumatized that's keeping your nervous system so dysregulated that you cannot even think about it? Well,
Mhm.
the two ways, the oil that opens the window are two things. One is safety, right? One is having a safe environment to talk about those things in with a safe person.
Mhm.
And as you share that, you don't get hurt and you get supported and you realize, oh, I can talk about this. I can deal with this and I'm okay. The other, unfortunately, is practicing in small doses the things we don't like,
Mhm.
right? The thing that we're terrified of doing, we have to do it in just a little tiny baby step, have a little bit of success. And over time, right, the window starts to widen. I can tolerate more of my husband's comments or speaking in front of people or doing a podcast or whatever the thing is that we're terrified to do and that we're triggered by. So we have to understand ourselves and gain enough insight into what happened to us and why we feel the way that we do. But then we have to take personal responsibility and realize that we are the ones who can step into those things and have success and overcome that. And the combination of those both things over time, we start to gain capacity and feel empowered. And before we know it, we're halfway through a podcast or dating again, or we're having sex again, or we're sharing a feeling and we feel good. We feel okay because all of that was within us. It's not an external thing that allows us to do those things. So I think it's really important for us to realize that and for the average person to slow down enough to do their own work, to realize that, man, their belief system and the lenses in which they see people, it takes a little bit of good to outweigh a lot of bad.
Yeah. So we have segued a few times, and I appreciate you, like, you bringing it back last time, so I'm going to bring it back now.
Yeah, yeah.
The topic is men's mental health. And, something that you mentioned that 10 minutes ago in another conversation we're having in terms of, men's interaction with women, the women in their lives, and them needing the woman to be completely safe for him to open up, right? What do you think some of the things men can do are to reparent themselves and not need, quote unquote, the external world to be completely what they need it to be? Because I don't know if it's ever going to be, right? How
Yeah,
can
it won't.
they count on themselves? Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got a few things. You've got to, and I'm not going to define this for everybody, but I would say these are the four main root issues. So our beliefs shape our thoughts and feelings, which shape our actions. So whatever our actions are, whether that's an addiction, whether that's anger, whether that's avoidance, those things, when we shut down and we don't share, or we yell, or we scream, or we go do drugs, or we drink, or we work, or whatever, those come from these underlying thoughts and feelings about ourselves. I think about a God or God and about other people. And most of psychology has stayed right there, right? CBT, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's like, what are your thoughts and feelings? And let's do your actions. Well, what we've learned, right, the last 20 years about the brain and trauma is that there are beliefs that shape our thoughts and feelings, which shape our actions. And so the first thing men can do is start to look at those beliefs. What do I really
Mm,
believe about who God is? Is there a God? Is there a higher power? What is the universe? How does that work? What do I believe about other people? Are they good? Are they worth my
mm,
time? Are they safe? What do I believe about relationships? Are they
mm,
valuable? And again, you have to do that in relationship with somebody you trust. You can't just sit in a closet or in a room thinking about this stuff
mm,
and writing in a journal. You've got to externalize that so someone can also challenge you or validate you or peel apart some of the things that may or may not be right. And then lastly, what do you believe about yourself? And so
mm,
part of that reparenting is going, man, I didn't get what I needed. I don't know how to ask for what I need. My dad never hugged me, or he never told me he loved me, or he was never affectionate. I only learned that women were good for one or two things, or man, I saw men treat women this way or talk about women this way. And I took all of that on, but that's only my little worldview, right? That's only my little sphere. There are thousands and millions of other people who might not think that way that can really resource me and teach me and educate me on a different worldview. The question is, am I willing to do that? Am I willing to see that I impact people in a positive, negative way? And the areas in which people are telling me they're negative, I'm the only one who could be responsible for it. And I'm the only one who could take that stand. And so part of, I think, good therapy and good healing is being validated as a man, doing that work, and then someone moving us out of the victim seat, and us realizing like we're also the problem and we have
mm,
responsibility. And so there are four things I would challenge people to think about. One is, what is their view of suffering?
mm,
What do we think about suffering? Is my goal to eliminate all suffering? Is all suffering bad? Is all suffering everybody else's fault but mine? Do I make other people suffer? Two, how do I find hope in suffering? Anxiety is suffering. PTSD is suffering. Rejection is suffering. And when those losing a job, being sick, these things are suffering. What do I believe about them and why are they happening? And two, how do I have hope? How do I persevere through it and believe that I'm going to get on the other side of it? Three, where do I find internal worth? How do I know that I'm loved? And then internal security. How do I know that I'm safe and I'm going to be okay? And then four, what do I believe about how people change? How does a person actually stop doing what they're doing that's hurting other people or themselves? Where does that power come from? And then how can I tap into that power and change myself? Because I cannot change anything on this side of my nose, right? I can only change stuff on this side of my nose. On the inside, like I cannot change another human being. And so those are the things I think I would challenge all people, but men especially, to dive into.
mm. And what about men who feel utterly misunderstood? Where can they start?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, to validate them, that we're all misunderstood. You know what I mean? Like we all have these stories and the ways that we interact with the world. And you know this as a clinician is that people come in and they don't know anything about themselves. You know, they know somewhat, they're an expert on their own story, but even what they think they know is only half of the story. You know, you work with a couple and you see a wife or husband for 6 months, and then the husband comes in and you're like, oh man, what I thought that was going on is the opposite of what is going on, or there's a whole nother side here, right? Or you bring a parent in with a kid, and so as a clinician you start to learn, like, I'm going to believe you and
Mhm.
I'm going to validate what you're saying and your experience, but I'm also going to know that half of what you're saying is your point of view
Yeah.
and not true. And
Yeah.
so I would say to men, you are misunderstood. We all are misunderstood, but people understanding you or misunderstanding you doesn't give you internal worth and value. And this is one of the
Right.
big problems we have, is that our attachment wounds and our trauma tells us that other people's view of us, their value of us, and what they think of us gives us security and worth. So if I can get everybody to like me, or I can dominate everybody, then I have power and control and I can get what I want. That's a false narrative. You cannot do that, and it will end in disaster in the long run. And so you're right. People don't understand you. There are people in your life that can understand you more. And so sit down with them over dinner, sit down with them over coffee and say, hey, I'm going to initiate that I have some needs, and I'm learning how to ask for those needs in an appropriate way, not in a passive aggressive way and not in an aggressive way. I'm going to clearly communicate, here's what I need. And then I'm going to leave it to you to show me whether you want to meet those needs or not. And if you do meet those needs, great. And if you say, I'm not capable of meeting those needs, then we'll renegotiate what we both can and how we can meet in the middle. But these are things that people who feel invalidated, who have not healed, they can't tolerate. Their window is small. They can't tolerate someone rejecting them or arguing with them. And you were talking about, like, group trauma. I mean, I think that's a huge issue that we have in the culture in the world, especially since COVID. But I think through the generations is that we've all seen and been exposed to so much racism and sexism and political drama that it's really hard for us to tolerate any talking point that sounds like a Republican or that sounds like a Democrat. So when we start to get in a conversation, we're already so hyped up to run or to fight that as
Mhm.
soon as we hear a conversation or a talking point, we're spiraling out of control. So it's really important for us to, as men, know ourselves, know our triggers, and then be able to regulate ourselves so we can hear from another person. And that's what I would challenge the women who are struggling with men who maybe get angry or shut down is, hey, your spouse, your husband, they need you to be regulated. They need you to be okay with them not getting there or saying the wrong thing or thinking out loud or saying something that's not true, but how they feel. You can help them by knowing that you're loved and you're valued and that what he says isn't changing who you are, that you're
Mhm.
good and you're worthy and you're valuable. I think ultimately because God makes us that way. But whatever people's views are, they have to have an internal worth and security that isn't relying on anybody else.
Mhm. Yeah, so to be strong in your sense of self and who you are, whatever ideas, right, like someone else carries doesn't have to, you don't have to be malleable, right? You can stay firm in your beliefs, and we all have our beliefs, right? Whether it's like religion,
Yep.
whether it's certain dogma, yes, like stay strong in that. That's who you are. That's what makes you who you are. That's your strength. But at the same time, use that to understand other people as well. And imagine if we
Yes.
all stood in our strength, right? You as a Christian, me as a Hindu, like a practicing Hindu, we stayed a woman, right? A man, like different colors, like we both like stayed firm in who we are, but we're understanding each other, right? And also
Exactly.
not getting
Exactly.
triggered by someone else's belief because it doesn't quite match, or we think that we have to change ourselves. Someone else saying something, we might interpret it as like, oh, I have to change myself or I have to be a certain way. Um, yeah, yeah, I get
Yeah,
it.
it's beautiful. I mean, I love our conversation. The fact that I'm a Christian, you're a Hindu is a very rare thing for people to see to go well, you know, or just being a white male and a female. It's like, it's so crazy that, you know, and you probably know this too, right? Within the Hindu religion, there are tons of people that you don't agree with how they live their life and how they view Hinduism
Don't
and
get
how they
me
walk it
started.
out, right? But it's like it's the same thing with Christianity. Like I hate that I'm automatically labeled as a right
Yeah.
wing Republican or whatever automatically. And it's like, that's not who I am at all. If you get to know me and you spend any amount of time with me, you would know that. Here's the problem:
Mm,
I'm not responsible for how other people think of me. I
right.
can't make their nervous system shut down. I can only be as kind and gracious and Christ like as I
Right.
can be. And I hope that over time and through our relationships, that comes off as authenticity. And I think for me, authenticity is way more valuable than people give it credit for. Like, if you know who
Right.
you are and you're confident in who you are, I don't need to talk you into doing anything. I don't need to talk you into liking me. I don't need to talk you into being a Christian. If that's something that you're compelled in your soul to do, then it's not my job to manipulate that or do anything about that. But what happens is that even Christians, they feel like their job is to save everybody and convert everybody, or even Hindus, or even Buddhists, or people feel like, well, I have this thing, and I need to talk you into it, and that is, in my opinion, not confident. I don't. If I'm confident that there's a God that's good that loves you, He's going to do what He's going to do, and I don't have to like
Mhm.
manipulate that. But the majority of people in religions are so traumatized and have experienced so much abuse and so much confusion that they're working out of their faith, not necessarily loving people and letting them be who they are, but trying to convince them that they should be loved and that their worth and value is even based on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think differences are triggering, right? And exactly what
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying is what people think of you cannot be your trigger. That means you're going to live your life like a puppet. And imagine
Yes.
living your life like a puppet.
But we
I
see
wouldn't
it.
want that for anybody. Yeah, yeah,
But we see it. There's so many people who allow themselves to lose their temper and say, well, they made me mad. Or get
yeah,
on Twitter and blow somebody up and say something hateful and say, well, the reason that I said that is because they did this.
yeah.
Or I'm going to be hateful because they deserve it because they did this. And that's
Mhm.
letting other people control you. And I just refuse to try to do that.
Right, absolutely. So I know we are nearing our time, but I did have one more question for you. I know we've
Sure.
talked
Yeah.
about dopamine hits, and we cannot not have this conversation about pornography, especially when it comes to men's
Yeah.
mental health.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that, wherever you want to start. I don't have any particular questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wrote a book called Building Better Bridges. And the concept of the book takes parents through how to talk to our kids about consent, body safety, sexual development, and just sexuality in general. And I wrote it from a clinical perspective. There's some Christianity in it, but I tried not to make it super heavily biblical because I wanted everybody to be able to read it and apply it. So people can read it and take skip the parts that kind of apply to the biblical lens and just look at the clinical lens. I think one of the major issues with men's particularly, girls too, but men particularly, is about 99% of the men that I've seen, that I've interviewed, that I've talked with tons of therapists about, their parents did not talk to them about sexual development. They did not talk to them about erections or masturbation or pornography. And this was long before they hit puberty, that men experience porn, experience sexual trauma. One in four boys experience sexual trauma. So before they're even ready developmentally and psychologically and biologically to be aroused and to be attracted sexually to a male or a female or whoever they want to be attracted to, trauma and exposure skews that arousal template and that lens. And unfortunately, that's a huge driver to, I think, a lot of men's shame and a lot of men's fear and a lot of the problems that we have in our culture. That happens, then they hit puberty, and they now in 2025 have a phone in their hand or a device in their hand where they can be sent all forms of sexual, abuse, trauma,
Mm,
domination, all of these different things. And again, they usually masturbate to that. And so now they're linking their dopamine hit and their view of women or men to how they orgasm. And then they meet a girl or a boy, and then they try to date and have a relationship and have sex, and it's a disaster. So by the
mhm,
time the average person in our generation is what, 29 or 30 and getting married for the first time, they have a good 15 to almost 20 years of neurological damage and dopamine neuropathways that have been funneled into something that they've never even talked to another person about, and that their parents didn't talk to them about, and that they weren't like guided or shaped. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's very neglectful. And in the book, I also did a TED talk on this. If people want to look at it, it's
Mm.
Clint Davis TED talk. You can just type it in YouTube. But I relate it to, when you teach your child to cross the street. All of us were either children taught to cross the street or we're teaching our kids. And we say, look both ways, hold my hand, watch out for cars, stay on the sidewalk. Well, if we take sexuality and we say, we live in a world where we let kids walk out into the street and get hit by cars that we didn't even know existed.
Mm.
We have grown up with no one telling us our family values or our religious values around these things. And our first experiences with sexuality, the large majority of us has been shame and fear and surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And then we don't go talk to our parent because they already communicated to us, we don't talk about these things, or these things are bad, or these things are dirty.
Mm.
And so now our bodies and our desires and the things that I think God wired for us to be good, now instantly as a child have a label of bad and dirty and filthy and wrong, which makes you bad and filthy and dirty and wrong. And
Mm.
so what happens psychologically is what we call splitting. You have lots of people who we keep secret private sexual lives and do things privately that no one knows about and that we feel shame about. And yet externally we cover all of that up. Or that person just lives a life that way. They don't have, right? They go, this is great. This is fine. I'm going to do whatever I want. There's no problem with any of this. And if you say anything about sexuality, then you're sex negative. And just like we were
Mm.
saying earlier, people's trauma response, even to this podcast, will be, oh, well, he's a Christian. So he has this crazy conservative
Yeah.
view about sex. And it's like, nope, the science has weighed in on all of this. And this is not like a Christian doctrine. Pornography is extremely addictive. 93% of it is violence against men and women. Most of the women and men that are there are taking drugs or taking pain medication so they can perform the acts. Lots of it is linked to human trafficking. And so there's an argument that there's consensual pornography. I don't know if that exists, but I know that the harm that it's doing is far outweighing any kind of good for a small amount of people who may be,
Oh,
getting through it unscathed.
yeah.
All that to say, 76% of men struggle with pornography, and somewhere around 63% of women have viewed pornography. So it's a very common thing, meaning we're not monsters if we struggle with it or look at it. It's inundating our smartphones and our culture. And like everything else, we just have to be very mindful about, why am I doing this? Why am I involved in this? How is this benefiting my life? What is this taking away from my relationships? And if we're willing to do that work and ask those questions, then I really believe that we'll see that it's something that we need to work really hard to fight and have self control over, and abdicate against in our lives with our kids and with other people and all that.
I wanted to add to that your comment about
Sure.
people assuming that, oh, he's a Christian male man, so automatically he's going to be anti-porn, or and I want to share that I'm a liberal, like as they come, super
Yeah.
liberal.
Yeah.
And here's where I began to shift my idea, right? Like initially it was, yeah, like people should be allowed to do whatever they want to do. If it's consensual, if it is the way it is, even watching, like they should be allowed to do whatever they want to do. Here's where my belief shifted a little bit. There's a page on Twitter, a woman runs it. I don't know the name of it, where she talks about a lot of trafficking that's involved in making these videos. And also to some people that also might be, oh, is that like conspiracy? Like how is there trafficking involved? Like the minute you say trafficking, it's like, oh, a conspiracy. But I also watched an interview of a woman who was in a way psychologically coerced, not in a way, she was psychologically coerced into making these videos. And in court, nobody believed her because they were like,
Mm-hmm.
well, you look like nobody's coercing you. You're doing it. You're enjoying it. But that comes with a lack of understanding of the psychological response of freeze, right?
Yep.
Dissociated freeze response, which is exactly what she talks about. She doesn't use this term. She doesn't say, oh, I froze. That was a freeze response. I'm not sure if she had that understanding, but what she said was, I know it looks like me. It looks like me having fun, but I wasn't there. I was
Mm-hmm.
checked out. For men not putting a gun to my head, but they were there and she had a freeze response, right? I'm just going to do
Hmm.
what these people want me to do and get out of here alive. That was a survival response that she had. That's where I started understanding the nuances of it. That it doesn't have to be somebody holding a gun to your head, right? And especially after I became a clinician and understood what trauma is and what trauma response looks like, and that lack of understanding in our society, that's not part of our vocabulary, right? Understanding the different types of responses that somebody can have in a traumatic situation. And that's where I started shifting my belief on pornography and how ethical it is. I don't think it is. I think it's an industry where some people really benefit at the expense of a lot of people, whether you're consuming it or because it desensitizes you. Absolutely, in
Hmm.
your sexual life, as well as being a human being, right? The types of porn that's available out there, it desensitizes you. Um,
Well,
so
yeah,
yeah, I
you
just
see that in the
wanted to
cult.
quickly add
You
that.
see, no, that's great. I mean, I love that you're thinking that way because it's just factual, right? It's not a. I can go on a whole theological, spiritual, Christian view of it, but ultimately, the clinical, psychological evidence for
Yeah,
these things are very, very clear now. And there's a, in all of these situations, there's a conversation between should you be allowed to do it, right? Like that's a different conversation than is it legal now? There's so many layers to that conversation, which again, I would say, man, sit down with somebody over coffee. Like sit down with a therapist. Like sit down with somebody who has some insight into the situation and discuss it. Don't
yeah,
just come to it
yeah,
with a closed mind of, no, this is good or no, this is bad. If you don't know anybody who's working with anybody who deals with pornography, or you don't know anybody who watches pornography, or whatever, like then you don't have much room to kind of argue and make any kind of passionate claims about anything. And I would say the same
mhm,
thing about LGBTQ or any of the things, abortion or any of the big like hot topic political kind of things that people can really get arguments about. It's like, well, do you know someone who's struggling with that? Have you ever met a person that deals with those kind of things? And if so, have you sat down with them and heard their opinion and their story and like where that came from and how that's a part of them or why they chose that? Because that is so invaluable to understanding other human beings and having an opinion. And we live in a world where people just shout out whatever it is that they think without any evidence or any backing or any expertise. And everybody's allowed to. That's why I love America, freedom of speech.
mhm.
But the reality is that, very quickly it just becomes your own personal opinion with very little fact or evidence or experience behind it. And to me, like that's just not unifying or helpful to any of us. And I think you're exactly right. Whether liberal or conservative or Democrat or Republican, there are so many more issues that are human issues that should not be
Yeah,
put
yeah.
in the category of politics. And man, people like you and I who can have these conversations and find the way to the middle. We agree on so many more things than we differ, probably. And so do I think really so do most people.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a matter of sit down and have a human conversation with someone else. And you're right, how we're wired, right? We don't care unless something happens to our family member or our neighbor, right? So, and that's when we begin to care about those things or understand at a deeper, nuanced level rather than just like a good, bad, this, that, all, or nothing type of thinking.
Yeah.
So just sit down, have a conversation of somebody who's been through that. What was their life experience like? See the human being in front of you, and I promise you, you will see nuances in life. That's the start. I think that's the start to start seeing nuances in life. And you might not be that person who's like so stern in something, right? Like definitely can speak on something. You might no longer be that person. You might be that person who says, "Well, actually, let me think about it. I don't know how I feel about that," but that's okay. That's okay.
Yep.
Find out. Like let yourself grow. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
So good. Yeah, I think if we
All right.
have this will be the last thing I'll say is I think for men and for women, if we can find a group of people who we can have relationships with and have
Mhm.
community with, and we can have honest, robust conversations, and we can prioritize those people, then we're not so needy to panic about all the things that are going on outside of us and outside of our
Mhm.
neighborhoods and our cities, because we have enough work to do right there in our own lives. And I would just challenge anybody
Mhm.
that's listening to this, like keep listening to podcasts, keep learning and listening to different perspectives, keep having conversations. And for me, it's truth and grace at the same time every time. I want to show
Mm,
people love and grace and mercy and understand that I am the biggest sinner and need help and need support and need counsel more than anybody else. And so if I can learn to give and love people through all my experiences and my pains and my mess ups, so can
right.
anybody else. And so, and then the other side is the truth part. We have to be people that stand up for what's right and advocate in our little spheres of influence for the things that I think God puts on our hearts and on our minds. And so do that, be graceful while you do it, be merciful while you do it, but stand up.
Yeah. With grace. Yeah, I like that. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really
Yeah,
enjoyed
it's
this
fun.
conversation. Yeah, I'm gonna listen back when I'm editing and be like, aha, I should have asked that. I should have asked this, but next time.
No, well, let's do it again. Yeah, I would love to come
Yeah,
back on and I'll circle back and get you on my podcast. And I'd love to
yeah,
hear, what you got going on.
yeah. Sounds good. Thank you.
Absolutely.